Once you do that, green light comes right on. That's how you do it live. No, I've spoken to all of them already.
So I have a bottle of water for you, and if you would like to, we can take another coffee with you on. Always need another coffee. I know, right?
Show up in your bills, your whole cabinet, and you buy one. All gifts. Not a problem.
I think we're gonna need the knife.
We are live streaming it though, so we'll have it on. Perfect. I don't have to put the mic on.
Check, check.
once you flip
Don't
that.
worry about getting up.
You learn through experience.
We're on.
All right. Wow. It weirdly got quiet right at the right time. Good evening, everybody. I'm super excited to see all of you here. My name is Rob Glover. I'm a associate professor of political science up at the University of Maine, Orono, so thanks for having me. And I'm also the co-director of an organization called the Scholars Strategy Network, the Maine chapter. And I'm going to, in a moment, introduce our wonderful panel for the evening, but before I do, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Scholars Strategy Network. So this is an organization that has over 40 chapters and now over 2,000 members across the country. And really, the scholars involved in the Scholars Strategy Network are interested in the same sorts of things that brought you here tonight. They're interested in opportunities to learn about the policy process and to think about how their expertise and their research can impact public policy. And so our role as a state chapter is to facilitate the sorts of connections and interactions that enable scholars and researchers to have a policy impact. So when I first came to Maine, I was telling some of you just a moment ago that I had these expectations to do engaged research, to do public scholarship, and to engage in research collaboration with community partners, and really didn't have an idea of where to begin or basic stuff about what the vibe of policymaking in the state of Maine was. And so the tremendous scholars within the network were really helpful for me in terms of making those connections and getting a sense of how my work could connect with issues that were of importance to folks around the state. And to build relationships with policymakers. So there's no cost to join the Scholars Strategy Network. It's a volunteer network. No one is getting rich off of the Scholars Strategy Network. Really, our purpose is to make these connections and to facilitate these sorts of opportunities. So we have 2 standing media relationships with the Bangor Daily News and the Kennebec Journal. We have media trainings. Actually, I wanted to put in a plug for tomorrow's policy brief writing workshop that will be happening from 9 to 11 over in the Alumni Center. And those sorts of tangible skill building workshops are something that we do quite a bit of. We do media training. Perhaps someone's reached out to you on the basis of your expertise and wants you to provide testimony and you don't know where to begin. We had one scholar who got a call from our congressman's office and was asked to give testimony before his subcommittee in Washington, D.C. He was having a little bit of a nervous breakdown. We were able to talk him through it. So we're able to provide those sorts of trainings to make those sorts of connections. And increasingly, what's been really exciting is advocacy organizations and policymakers reaching out to us and saying, do you have someone in the network, or is there someone in the broader SSN network that can provide this expertise? And more often than not, there is, and we're able to make that connection. So I hope some of you will think about becoming more involved with SSN. There are these little, these very colorful handouts up at the table by the door. And there's also some information about how to join the network. And those of us who are involved in the network, there's a number of us here tonight, we're happy to hang back after we wrap up and answer any questions you have. Or I left my business cards up there. Actually, the name of our building is about to change due to a donation, so you'd be really helping me if you just took some of those, because eventually I'm going to have to replace them all. That's, I think, all I want to say about the Scholars Strategy Network. I am going to introduce our panel, and we're going to talk for a little bit, and then I hope we can have kind of a conversation, and I hope you all have questions that arise out of the conversation here. So our moderator tonight is Winifred Tate, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Colby, and the Director of the Maine Drug Policy Lab. All right. We're joined by Representative Jessica Fay, who serves House District 66 in the Maine House of Representatives, Representative Charlotte Warren, serving District 84 in the Maine House of Representatives, and Julie Ann Smith, who's Executive Director of the Maine Farm Bureau. So I'm going to turn it over to Winifred.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I thought we could start with some just general stories that you could tell us about how your work in and before the legislature has benefited from your connections with local academics around the state. Charlotte, you want to start?
Sure. So how has my work in the legislature benefited from networking with academics across the state? Well, I thank you for the question and for the opportunity to be here. And actually, 2 of the academics that I work with are right here. So it's really easy for me to give a few examples. So I serve on the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. This is my 8th year serving on that committee. It's my 6th year serving as the House Chair of the committee. And we work on all sorts of different issues. Sometimes I describe it as like guns and drugs and prisons. And so we do a lot of different policy work around just lots of reform of the criminal justice system in general. And one of the pieces of reform that we're trying to work on here in the state, because we're dealing with an epidemic that doesn't get talked about quite as much in the State House, the opioid epidemic, is we work a lot on restructuring drug sentencing and drug policy in the state. And I lean on both of these professors who do a lot of research in these arenas. So if we can bring to life in when we're making policy decisions, what's really happening to Maine people? And that's something that is being studied here at Colby College, and that Rob is studying also. And his scholars do a lot of work around drug policy. So not only will his students come and testify, and Rob and Winifred come and testify, but also they're actually doing the research. So Winifred has done research inside our county jails and talking to women who are affected by the opioid epidemic. So she can bring to the Criminal Justice Committee real stories from real Mainers and real Maine families. And that really brings the policy discussion to life, right? When we can actually talk about the things that we're trying to decide, we can talk about it in terms of our own Mainers, our own neighbors, our own community members. It's just really invaluable to the work that we do.
I realize it looks like I set that question up, but I wasn't thinking about that when I started with Charlotte. So forever my chair, Charlotte. Thank you. Can we go down the panel and hear more stories?
Sure. Thank you. So I'm Julianne Smith. I am the Executive Director of Maine Farm Bureau. We're a membership organization for farmers. And so we have an amazing relationship with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and we rely on them very heavily to help agriculture in Maine be successful. So we're really reliant on the research that the university does. We're reliant on the academic efforts, the education that the university provides for people who want to farm. There is an amazing kitchen, test kitchen at the university that a lot of farmers use when they want to bring a jam or a jelly or some other type of product to market. They have those resources and availability with the university. And I have the very unique position of being the president of the Board of Agriculture for the University of Maine. It is an advisory committee that was created back in the 90s. It actually was created by my hometown representative, who was very frustrated that the university was threatening to shut down Highmore Farm in Monmouth. So she used the legislative process to create the Board of Agriculture at the University of Maine to ensure that Highmore was not shut down as a research facility, because it was so important to farmers. And I now get to serve as chair of that. So it's pretty fascinating to see how impactful legislation can be, how policy shapes what happens at the university, and how the university can also shape policy with their partners.
Super segue. As I was getting prepared, I'm Jessica Fay. I represent House District 66, which is parts of the towns of Raymond, Poland, and Casco, and my past committee assignment was the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. And now I serve on the Appropriations and Financial Affairs Committee, so a lot of times now what I see is once the policy is complete, it comes to us for funding. So I'm going to set that aside and talk about one specific example from when the University of Maine really helped do research that our committee asked for. We had a bill around reducing food waste, and it's a really complicated subject, and the committee itself really didn't have the resources or the knowledge to dig into the stakeholder group and systems mapping. And so the University of Maine, the Mitchell Center said, you know what, this is something we're interested in, so why don't you let us try and take this over, and we'll see what we can come up with for you for recommendations. So they did a whole research project, basically that the committee had asked for more information about, and it was fascinating to watch the process and even to be able to participate in that academic process, mapping of all of the different places that we could do interventions for dealing with food waste and food insecurity in the state. So
Those are great examples. I was wondering if you could, from your experience, what advice would you give to academics or students that are interested in getting involved? What do you need to know, and where would you start? We can just go down, or anyone want to jump in? Do you want to jump in?
I was going to say keep it simple. So there's the legislature asking questions, but then there's also if you have information that you want to share with policymakers. We're citizen legislators in Maine, and so we have varying levels and ability in terms of what we know about and what our personal experiences are. And don't assume that just because we're on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, that's our background. I mean, it might be something that we're interested in. So I would say keep it simple, and even like charts and graphs. We like colorful things that are easy to read.
I would agree. I think the times that I'm most effective are when I'm able to be very concise and say, here is the issue, here is why we are supporting it, here are our challenges with it, and being open when you are approaching a legislator and saying, I understand this is my position, but I want to hear what you have to say as well.
I would say just do it. And I think I would say that because it can sometimes be intimidating to go and maybe if you're thinking about testifying in front of a committee, that can be an intimidating process, but I will let you know that, this is my 8th year in the legislature, and still when I need to go in front of another committee, I sometimes get nervous. And it's just part of the process, but you do it anyway. And it gets easier every single time you participate in the process. And guaranteed, you are more of an expert in the room than at least 1 or 2 of the legislators on the panel. Because we get put on these committees, and sometimes we get put on a couple of committees, and we learn as we go, but we really need to hear from you. If you care about a certain issue, I guarantee you that you know more about the issue than most of us do on the panel. So I just think it's so important to sort of make yourself do it, even if you're a little nervous about it, and it'll pay off in dividends. I really think that it gets easier, you build relationships, and it's worthwhile work, and it feels good, to sort of get involved in policy making.
So one of the things that you all have talked about is the importance of doing research in Maine and the focus on Maine. And so some of us are experts in other places. Do you think that there is the opportunity to bring that expertise to the legislature and say, Maine is thinking about this issue, I researched it in this other place, how can you I'm going to bring my expertise in that comparative sense. As someone from away, I'm very interested in the kind of the sense that the Maine legislature is for Mainers about Maine. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Oh, I think it's important, right? Bringing different perspectives from other places, experiences from other states, what they have done around policy. They may have experience that we haven't had yet. And I think, both in the United States and then also internationally, the more innovation, the more thoughtful and creative solutions to problems that folks can bring or present to us, the better.
I think one of the amazing parts about the Maine legislature is that it is a citizen legislature. These are your neighbors. It's your next door neighbor that ran for office and who is there to represent you. So they have a vested interest in what you have to say. There are a lot of different types of legislatures throughout the United States. I find in Maine, people are approachable. They want to hear who you are and what you have to say. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity for anybody who's going to be introduced to the legislative process. Maine is the place to do it.
Mm-hmm. This is a safe space, so I'm going to give a little real talk. There are some of us, legislators like Jess and I, who we're going to read a lot of research. We are very driven by, by studies and by information that's brought to us, and we're going to read those things, and we want to make, good policy decisions. And I'm just going to be real with you. There are other people that are going to be like, this is Maine. It's not Massachusetts. This is Maine, it's not California. This is Maine, it's not New York. This is Maine, it's not, you get the idea. So, be ready for that. And maybe that's just in the criminal justice world, but I don't think so. There are just folks who aren't really interested in following other states' examples. They really do believe that Maine is a place where things that happen in other states, I'm speaking from criminal justice reform. It's something that I hear, and because you're in my committee, you're in our committee a lot. We hear all the time. We are getting pushback of, no. We don't need the criminal justice reform like other states do. We don't have those issues here with police. We don't have those issues here in our prisons, right? And the truth is, we have all of the same issues because it's about systems, right? I think that it depends on which legislators you're talking to.
I can tell you some stories.
She can.
But I won't until after. So one of the things I think about when I'm testifying is the different positions. I could testify as Winifred, resident of Waterville. I could testify as Winifred, professor at Colby, expert in drug policy. I could testify as someone who works with the Maine Recovery Advocacy Project as an ally. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about thinking through how people approach testimony from these different angles.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think the message should match the messenger. So if you're trying to share a personal story or a personal experience being a person, if you're trying to share data, if you're trying to share research from a position of sort of academic authority, I think being that academic authority is really helpful.
Mm-hmm. As a lobbyist, I tend to focus my introduction on what way I can best connect with the members of the committee. So for example, if I'm going before a committee and the senator from my town is on that committee, I'll make sure to say, my name is Julianne Smith. I'm a resident of Reedfield, and I'm a constituent of Senator XYZ. And then go on to say, and I represent Maine Farm Bureau. So I think finding that personal connection is important because honestly, it gives them that little bit of extra reason to say, oh, I want to listen to that person, that I have something in common with them, so.
I think that switching how you introduce yourself to match who you're talking to and what you're testifying on makes a lot of sense. And so I'll give you an example of someone who testifies a lot in front of our committee. And when she's testifying on a bill we're working on right now around solitary confinement in jails and prisons, she's really an expert on that topic. And so she really talks about herself from, I work with the Maine Prisoner Advocacy Coalition. And when we're talking about maybe a different kind of policy, she's also the mother of an incarcerated son and the daughter of an incarcerated father. And so when she puts that hat on, she can share with us in a very different way, and it's very, very valuable. So I think that you will read, everybody, when you're doing your work, you'll sort of read what's what's your best hat to wear that day? You know, how is there a story that you're going to tell that's going to identify who you are in community? So I think that it can switch.
So I was hoping you could give a mini primer on the legislative cycle and the different opportunities for participation. Like, what are the moments and how do we find them as academics when it might be opportune for us to weigh in?
Wow. So I think if you have a problem you're trying to solve, finding the right person to work with you to solve that problem happens way before any legislative session begins. We're thinking about what we might be working on in the next legislature, potentially now. So I would say if you're working to solve a problem, then early and understand that it will likely take time. And when I say time, I mean potentially years. And you may have to keep trying. But so that's sort of the first step. And I think I'll let the others talk about it.
So as a lobbyist, and my colleagues may not agree with me, but I would say anytime, call your representative, call your senator anytime, at any point in the process, and say, this is what I'm thinking, this is my concern, this is why I would support this. And they may have feedback for you about, well, I have a public hearing coming up, it would be great to hear you testify, or we've already had our public hearing, but maybe I need you to talk to a few of my colleagues. So I think absolutely, ideally, start when you have the idea before the legislative session happens, but just because it's in the middle of the session, it doesn't mean that you don't do it.
I agree with both of them. So I think that you should always feel free, always, to reach out to your representative and your senator, always. When you know something's going down or you have an idea, like that's totally what you should do. And don't try to reach us once. I have to tell people this. Please nag us, because we get so many emails and sometimes they just, anyway, please nag us. Like really nag us. Find more than one way to reach out. But also, if you really care about some specific type of policy, maybe you really care about the environmental policies that are happening in Maine. What I would do if I were you is find the organizations that are working on those issues and get on their mailing lists, get on their action alerts, right? I care about education policy in addition to the work that I do. I'm an educator by trade, and so I want to know what's happening in the education committee. But I do not have time to be spending there all the time and figuring out what they're working on. So I need to be making sure that I get alerts from organizations that are also tracking the piece of information that I care about, right? I subscribe, even though I'm a member of the legislature, I subscribe to a whole bunch of different organizations that do a really good job at letting me know when public hearings are coming up and when work sessions are coming up. Because I might want to, like I said earlier, I might want to go to another committee and testify on something because it's something I really care about. So I think getting on mailing lists of different organizations that focus on what you care about is a really good way to plug in.
What do you do if your representative doesn't really agree with you or thinks very differently from you? What are the opportunities?
Who might you be talking about?
I don't know, but you might want to look up the senator for Waterville.
I think the first thing is, in any communication, maintaining respect, civility is 100% the only way to go about it. I have a tendency to get my hackles up when people attack me or potentially call me names for a particular position, and that's not helpful. I will say that engaging them with data again, and with kindness, and maybe even an understanding of what their experience is that is making them not agree with you, and then kind of working forward from that. I think that's a good policy, but the number one thing is just, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but yeah, just be nice. It's hard sometimes, but yeah.
And I would say be persistent. You know, just because they say no once doesn't mean that's no forever. And that can be really intimidating and hard. Once you get that no, it can, you know, it can be easy to say, oh, okay, they don't agree. Well, they didn't agree with me presenting it that way. Maybe if I presented it a little differently, maybe if I ask questions that would help engage them in a different way, maybe I can push the needle a little bit.
I would agree, just do it anyway. Even if you know, or you have pretty good experience that they don't agree with you on certain issues, sometimes it's just about the volume business. You know, sometimes it's just about making sure that somebody gets a whole bunch of communications. And so I think that it's how we are involved citizens. So I think also the act sometimes is as important as what's coming from the other side. But I totally agree with Jess. Even if you've had tough interactions with them, I think always making sure that you start the conversation in exactly the way you want people to start the conversation with you. I'm always surprised when I get, these emails that I think people think they're going to move me with, that kind of, kind of conversation, or, kind of stating what they know I think, which is always really fascinating because sometimes I don't even know what I think, and so I think, always making sure that we approach people the way that we want to be approached is really lesson number one.
Maine's a small town. You will meet people again. So this is all very good advice in every dimension.
I would love to follow up on that and say you could also run against them.
Ooh, that's good too.
I mean,
I've done my time. I was
Just
on the
a
Waterville
thought.
City Council. I can tell you stories about that too. So I was thinking, I think all of this advice has been very much borne out in my experience, seeking out ally organizations and getting involved, finding the moment of connection with different legislatures. But I was wondering if we could maybe shift our thinking a little bit. And so we've been focusing on the legislature, but I know you guys are involved in so many different levels of policy making. So where else could we think about academics getting involved, whether it's city councils or municipal level, media? Those are a lot of things, but maybe we could talk about the level of the town or city where people are working. What have you seen work there?
I would say you're an expert in your field, and if you have information that you need to share or that you feel would be helpful for decision makers, anytime, any place is good to is a good place to share that. And I would say if you're not able to do that in a formal presentation type way, take that information and turn it into an op-ed, or call the local paper, or and ask them to write a story about it and give your perspective. That's a really good way to get information out there and to help potentially move public opinion about something.
Our group, Maine Farm Bureau, is a grassroots policy development organization. And so our farmer members will actually come forward. I'll give you a great example. if you are a member of 4-H, which is a farming education opportunity for kids, you are not excused from school if you miss a day for a 4-H event. And so we had a member come forward and say, this is a problem. My kids are in school. If they go to a 4-H event, it's an unexcused absence. If they go to a soccer game, it's excused. And so she said, I would like for Farm Bureau to help create this state policy that would allow 4-H students to be able to have an unexcused absence. And so it comes to we have a state annual meeting. We discuss this issue, and then everyone votes on it and says, yes, all farmers agree that we should absolutely have 4-H events as an excused absence for students. And so I have brought this to my legislator. It will be, we'll be putting in a request for a bill, and hopefully that will become state law just from that process. So there are, Farm Bureau is not unique with that. There are a lot of organizations out there that utilize that process, but it's a great way to not only say, hey, this is policy that I want, this is policy that a whole lot of people want. So where your interests lie, look for those groups who are doing that work and join up and get collaborators to help you.
And I would say reading your local newspapers, and even if you're just sort of skimming, reading the opinion section, but kind of keeping a bead on what's happening in your local school system. I don't have children. I pay a lot of attention to what's happening in my local school system, right? If my school system is having a conversation about police in schools, you can bet I'm going to be there with some research. My community, I live in Hollowell, and we are very quickly seeing all of our affordable, even rental space, be developed into condos. And I'm not an expert at real estate or housing policy or anything like that, but I know how to find studies. I know how to find, policy work that academics are doing. And when a city council like ours in Hollowell has a agenda of 14 or 15 items, they just don't have the time. And I don't expect them to have to dig into every one of those issues, but I really care about that. I want to make sure that the people that work at the restaurants that I like to go also can live in my community. Diversity is very important to us in Hollowell, and that also includes socioeconomic class, right? For us, that's something I really care about a lot. So again, I don't know a lot about it, but I've been going to city council meetings. I'm taking work that's been done and research that's been done in other parts of the state to my city councilors, offering it to them and asking them to engage in the material so that we can make good decisions and so that we can sort of protect what we have in Hollowell. So those are a couple of examples, but I think, paying attention to what's happening in your local newspaper so you know when meetings are happening. And then again, I guarantee, you're not gonna, I think sometimes people think they don't have anything to offer, right? That everyone on this panel is maybe some sort of expert or smarter than them. I guarantee if it's something you care about, there's so much that you can bring to the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We've been focusing on legislative testimony, but there's always the opportunity for public comment at city council meetings, at school board meetings, letters to the editor. It's very easy to get published in the Morning Sentinel. You just email them, and they eventually will publish it, in my experience. So those are opportunities. We have a Colby colleague who's on the Kennebec Water District. She's a representative. So there's all kinds of places that people can get involved. So I have many more questions, but I wondered if you have questions. Anyone want to Anything? Yeah? Okay. Should I bring you the mic? Is that, oh, okay.
I have it.
Forgot to get instructions for that part, sorry.
Thanks so much for coming and for your comments tonight. I'm Kimberly Flowers, the Executive Director of the Goldfarb Center. I have 2 questions. My first one is, as someone who personally is also from away and only been in Maine 2 years, I'm curious from a policy perspective, what are the biggest issues that's on your mind? What are the big things that you're grappling with right now? You mentioned housing crisis, 4-H. I'm sure there's other, just what are the big things that you're grappling, just 1 or 2? And then my second question is, what do academics do wrong? When they come to you, what is it that they are not doing correctly that you could maybe share some lessons from that? Thank you.
Well, I would say keep it, as I said before, keep it simple, and remember that we're all citizen legislators, and even in your local school boards and select boards are mostly volunteers. So think a little bit maybe more contextually about what it is that you're trying to say. And then to answer the first question, right now things that I think Maine is grappling with are our workforce shortage across the board. And I've been actually with one of the Scholars Strategy folks has weighed in and helped us work on policy around the direct care workforce shortage in particular, which impacts older Mainers and folks who need help with activities of daily living, either in an institutional or in a home setting. And I mean, climate change is there. It's in the background and in the foreground, I think, all the time, and kind of underlays everything else.
So in agriculture, labor is also a huge issue. There is an enormous shortage. It used to be that high school kids loved to work on a farm, give them a little bit of extra cash. It helped all the farmers get through the extra work in the summer, and that has really stopped. And so it's been very difficult to find workers. It not only is difficult to find the workers, it's difficult to pay workers. I mean, why would you want to go work outside in 100-degree humid conditions when you can work in an air-conditioned Target and make the same money? So there are a lot of challenges with agriculture in terms of the labor force. And then for Maine specifically, the cost of production in Maine is astronomical. It is literally cheaper to grow a head of lettuce in California and ship it to Maine than our farmers can grow it here. The cost of inputs, the short growing season, the lack of labor, just getting anything anywhere in the state of Maine is very challenging. So transportation is a huge issue. So I'm sure I could go on for probably another hour about all the issues in agriculture, but those are the highlights. And please remind me, what was your second question? So from the farming perspective, academics want to do research on things they can get funded, and that isn't necessarily what we need research on. So that, I think, is a challenge that a lot of my farmers have experienced, where they'll say, hey, I need to figure out how to improve this soil, and the researcher will say, well, I have funding for this soil experiment, but that's not really going to help you. So there can be a disconnect there sometimes. I mean, not through any fault of the researcher, but we all understand that you can only do research you can get funded.
I'll start with the second question first. I think sometimes what researchers do wrong is not, I was going to say, is not make it super interesting, but what I meant by that was they don't bring it to life. Sometimes folks are feeling so much the need to read their testimony because I think they don't think we're going to actually read their testimony, or they think that that's their job, is to just like read their testimony in 3 minutes. And so sometimes it's read very fast, and it's read in a way that we're not really meant to consume it, especially if it's material that I'm not super familiar with myself. So I think what would really help that a lot is if researchers, the real experts in the room, could allow themselves to present to us 5 or 6 or 7 bullet points that are really interesting to your audience, right? I think we have to think about who your audience is, so that we all make sure that we're going to go back and read that testimony, right? I have to be interested in it to engage with it. And just somebody, reading as fast as they can because they've written, 5 pages and they have 3 minutes, that doesn't work for me, and I don't think it works for anybody else. I can guarantee you that most of us read every piece of testimony, because I can guarantee you that these decisions are hard. It is not easy synthesizing all of this information and then having a choice between 2 things, yes or no. And so I think delivering the material in a way that engages me in what you're saying, I'm going to go back and really look at that, and I'm also going to be able to read the information in a way that my brain, allows me to process it. So please spread that around, because that's really important, and I think it would make people much more effective. I'm very concerned about housing in Maine, not just in the city I live in, but I'm very, very concerned about housing in Maine. I'm very concerned about behavioral health in Maine, and when I say behavioral health, I mean the mental health crisis that we have in this state, and the substance use disorder and alcohol use disorder issues that we have in Maine. And the reason I'm so concerned about those things is we haven't adequately funded a response system. We still don't adequately fund a response system. And so do you guys want to know where we deal with everybody who's struggling with those issues? Police, courts, jails, prison. Because when you're sick, in whatever way that sick presents itself, you will get louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, until at some point your loudness, your expression of your pain, whether that's behavioral health or substance use disorder, pretty soon your loudness will become socially unacceptable. And pretty soon you will be dealt with, when really what you need, because you're sick, is you need help. You need help like way over here, but we don't fund that. So you get louder and louder and louder and louder, and pretty soon you're dealt with by police and courts and jails and prisons. And throwing somebody into a cell with an iron bars around them is exactly the opposite of the way we're ever going to help our neighbors and our friends. Maine, for 9 years in a row, our crime rates have dropped and our incarceration rates are rising. That's what I'm very concerned about.
I hope that wasn't a personal attack, Charlotte, about the delivery of testimony. Carrie?
Hi, Carrie Levan. I'm a SSN member, and I am on the, I guess I do like voting stuff with SSN. That's like my expertise is participation, civic engagement stuff. But my question is about the role of public opinion, right? So as a scholar, how important is it for me to not just persuade legislators, but to persuade the public, right? So how closely are you as legislators paying attention to the priorities that Mainers have, which my guess is they're not as concerned about behavioral, providing that funding. You're concerned about that, but most Mainers probably aren't. So how important is it to try and persuade them that your issue is important, and also that the position that scholarship supports as the solution to that problem is the way to go? So how closely do you pay attention to public opinion when you're trying to pass legislation in both of those areas, in what issues get prioritized and then what policy position you adopt?
So sometimes public opinion drives policy, and sometimes policy drives public opinion. And so it's hard to sort of answer the question depending on what issue you're talking about. So I mentioned climate change. I would say that in Maine, public opinion has driven the beginning of Maine's ability to address climate change. But our ability to address climate change is also only sometimes goes as far as public opinion will let it. So, great example, there was a proposal around a carbon tax. And some of us thought it was an interesting proposal to explore. We didn't know what it would mean. But we heard from folks that we need to reduce fossil fuels, we need to reduce carbon emissions. So this was potentially a solution. And then even just for thinking about that as a possible solution, public opinion really turned on us, because it turned into, you want to, make it more expensive for people to heat their homes or drive. So I think there's a balance, and sometimes it gets a little bit out of whack. But I would also say that some of those solutions aren't necessarily always wrong. It just takes time for that to marinate and for folks to come to accept that. And I think that's where scholarship can really help, continuing to sort of issue data points, and even think about places where we could intervene that maybe don't get us 100% there, but that get us there in little bursts, in ways that public opinion can digest and move in the right direction.
I think with farming, especially we react very regularly to public opinion. There are lots of opinions about tools that are used in agriculture, for example, pesticides. And there are a lot of people who have very strong opinions, who have never visited a farm, who don't understand how they're used, and who are extremely critical based on somebody else's opinion that may or may not be informed. I think every industry is shaped and impacted by public opinion, and the policies that we seek out to support or oppose, we always have to balance with, what is the perception of this versus what are we experiencing in our industry, and how do we find something that addresses both of those?
Mm-hmm. I agree with Jess, definitely, that you can't do one without the other. Sometimes you're working on policy for a really long time, and then all of a sudden the public catches up, right? All of a sudden the public is like, and you've been like trying, and then all of a sudden the public is just like there. And I think there are other times when the public is like leading, and lawmakers aren't getting it, right? So I think it has to be both directions. I definitely try to pay attention, definitely to what my district is paying attention to, what's happening at my school board meetings, what's happening at the select board meetings, I go to town meetings. I have a city and 2 towns that I represent. But also I gotta say, I try to read all the local newspapers. I try to check out the letters to the editor. I try to read the opinion pieces. I can't do that, all of them every day, but that's important to me. I pay attention to social media, you know. I listen to public radio, you know. So I try very much to engage with what Mainers are talking about, because, and I also try to influence public opinion, you know, even if I don't necessarily want to go to some event or speak at something, you know, because sometimes you want to like Netflix and chill, you know. I always say yes. I try to always say yes, because I want to try to drive public opinion about the issues I care about. And part of that is just saying yes to things like this, and every chance I get slipping in criminal justice policy. See how I'm doing that? So I also try to drive public opinion as well.
Oh, nice. 2 for 1. Thank you so much for this. This has been really engaging and wonderful, and I appreciate you all for speaking tonight. So I, just to take the opportunity to kind of diss the Massachusetts legislature, I find that there are barriers to engaging research in the policymaking process or driving evidence-based research that are inherent to the structure of the legislature. So whether that's kind of politically driven committee appointments or just, older or leadership folks having way more staff, a lot of different things. I'm interested, one, in hearing, I'm sure there are no such barriers within the Maine legislature, but if there are, I'm interested in hearing about what they are and what that might mean for how researchers should think about like who they reach out to or timing for engaging with the policymaking process. And maybe the more like positive flip is just, are there any kind of surprising opportunities to overcoming those barriers and engaging research in the policymaking process?
I feel like Winifred could really answer that question as one person for sure who does that work.
So I made up a thing called the Maine Drug Policy Lab at Colby College and started testifying at the legislature. And I will say, Maine is a small town, and that makes it really easy to do things. And there are a lot of structures within the legislature that make that particularly true, which I think are, in some ways, weaknesses of the legislature because there's no staff. There's 3 staff. Is that correct? How many staff is there? There's like
4. Well, it's kind of divided, but like in a committee, there's basically 2. There's like an analyst and a clerk.
Yeah. So people don't have their own staff. You would think for how productive people are that they have this army of staff, but it's just them. And there's term limits, so there's a lot of turnover. It's a citizen legislature, so that means people come eager and anxious to serve, and they have their passions that drive them, but if there are other things, they may not be as aware of those issues. And so there's a lot of opportunity. And you can sign up and go. And so one of the really interesting things of the past year has been, it's all been on Zoom, which I think has created some extra participation that maybe wouldn't have happened if people had to go to, but you can also watch it. It's all on YouTube. If you want to see what the Criminal Justice Committee, look at YouTube, and you can see people testifying and get a sense of what's going on. So I think all of those things are real opportunities for people that want to get involved. I've had students get involved, reading testimony for people who are incarcerated or can be there for other reasons. And then so that's the initial level, and then you get to a second level, you're like, well, I really want to figure out how this works. Well, it's a 2-year cycle, and people start doing bills in the fall and have to file them by December, and it starts in January and then you kind of get to the next level where you're like, really, how does this system work? And getting into it more, and I think it's been really fun to try to connect with people and to the community of people that are working on the issues that I care about is really great. So that's the highlights, I think, of my experience. I don't know if you have more advice.
I actually just had sort of an interesting idea that I had never thought of before until this very second, which is we have nonpartisan policy analysts that work, that analyze, you know, in a very dry way what a bill might do. My experience is sometimes those policy analysts also have contacts outside of the legislature when they have a question about something. Maybe not necessarily in the context of specific legislation, but I was the director of the Commission to Study Long-Term Care Workforce Issues, the chair rather, and our analyst had all of these contacts through her work as the analyst for the Health and Human Services Committee. And she was able to reach out to those policy experts who are doing research around, you know, how do we intervene in certain areas to help, you know, improve the workforce. So becoming like a go-to person, and having that relationship, and I think it's relationships really. It's like making connections like this that help get that information to the legislature. So she set us up with some amazing people that came in nationally to teach us about what solutions were happening and what the data shows. And I would also put in a plug for the National Conference of State Legislatures. They do a lot of looking around what's happening nationally, and they do a lot of, like, they have their own policy people who are doing data analysis. And if you have something that you think that they should know, or if you kind of look in to see what they're up to, you know, they're citing studies and doing research all the time. So if you want to inform public policy through research, that's another way to do it.
I think one of the biggest barriers for these poor legislators is that they have to vote on generally over 2,000 bills each session. That is a lot of reading. That is an intimidating amount of expectation of, you need to make an expert decision on this piece of legislation that is going to impact every person in Maine, and you've got to vote the right way. That's a lot. You know, I can't tell you how many times that I've gone to a representative in the hall and said, I need to talk to you about LD 1911, and they go, which one's that? So it's a lot of work to be a legislator, so they both should be highly commended for everything that they are able to accomplish.
I actually know what LD 1911 is, by the way.
I think one of the things that's different about Maine than Massachusetts, for sure, is that, like, Julie can do that, and we all expect that, you know, that folks can come up and be like, you know, Representative Fay, I know you have this issue in front of your committee. Could I have 5 minutes of your time? You know, give you the elevator speech and a business card, you know. And I don't know if that happens the same way in other places. Yeah, I hear that it doesn't. But literally, we'll, you know, at least I just stop, put my bag down, and I'm generally interested in, you know, I'm not afraid that if we disagree, like, somehow what you think is going to get on me, you know, which I think is fascinating in this society that we live in, you know, like, so I'm always happy to listen, even if I know from the second you walk up to me that I am disagreeing with you, you know. We listen, and I think that most people, do you think most people in the Maine legislature do? Yeah. Yes. And so I see, you know, that's what we do. And there's a gauntlet you can't, there's only one way to get into your seat. And so that means going through the gauntlet. Art is laughing because he's also a legislator and a Colby alum, and he's here. And it's true, you cannot, there's no sneak attack way to get to your seat. So, and so folks are just there and just sort of grabbing, reaching, not grabbing you, but reaching out and saying, can I talk to you,
Standing strategically in front of you.
Yes. Yep, exactly. Yeah, so I think that's probably one of the things that makes it really different.
I think we've come to the end of our time, but we have one more question, so maybe this could be our concluding.
So I just heard a lot of need for Maine-specific research, depending on, right, you said like that would be ideal, but certain legislature members are willing to listen to research from other places, but some are not. And so, at least when I've only been here a short time, but a barrier to that or a limitation is actually having data on Maine itself, because the coverage within Maine from the nationally representative, federally funded data sets is very limited and is mostly concentrated in the southern counties. And so I guess my question is there a push within the legislature to sort of have more rigorous data collection such that more evidence-based or data-driven sort of policy analysis could be done within the state?
Oh, I love that question. Would that it were so. I think we're moving in that direction. I know there's a lot of states that are really defining what evidence-based policymaking means, and that they are moving in that direction and trying to enshrine that in their process. We're not, I don't think, quite there yet in terms of really making that part of the process. Part of it is because we don't have the resources really to do that. But I would love to see more statistically significant Maine-based data that we could work from, because we do, when it comes to a lot of the more emerging policies, we really do depend on national data, which may or may not actually be an accurate representation of what's happening here.
So speaking from my policy sort of vantage point, we have our assistant majority leader, who in House of Cards is Frank Underwood, right? So if you need what the role is Rachel Talbot Ross. And Rachel Talbot Ross has had multiple bills that are about collecting data in Maine. And she's got bills in right now, but she got some really important bills passed last year. One specifically was about creating something that's called a racial impact statement, so that you're actually gathering data and looking at bills not just through the fiscal impact, but through the racial impact, right? So in the work that I do around prisons and jails, every place that you look, if the penalty's higher, there's going to be a wider disparity between persons of color and people that are white in Maine, right? Latest census we did of Long Creek, which is our youth prison, we have an under 2% population of youth of color in Maine. 23% of the youth in the prison, children of color, right? So looking at the racial data in Maine is something that Rachel Talbot Ross has really pushed. And like I said, we passed racial impact statements, but we also passed a bill around racial profiling with police and pulling cars over. The other thing that's changing is our judicial system in Maine is finally in the process of going online. It's literally still paper. And so they are in the process. Some of the courts are now all online. And why is that important? We need data systems that can talk to each other, right? In order for all of you who do this research to analyze data, you have to be able to aggregate the data, right? You don't want 15 Excel spreadsheets that you first have to like get to talk to each other, right? You're like, do you feel so seen right now? Oh, okay. Okay. And so also our prosecutors in Maine are working to finally upgrade their systems. So I think we're finally starting to go to systems where different departments can talk to each other, right? Because really what we need to look at is, all right, how many people, in again, my perspective, my work, how many people that are in our county jails have also been served by some HHS program, right? We want to be able to look at, I think, we want to be able to analyze that kind of data. So yes, there is a lot of, they're in little different places. They're in different, there's a big data collection bill happening in state and local committee right now. There's another one happening in criminal justice. There's another one happening in judiciary committee. So there's a lot of us that are aware of how little data we have to make policy decisions based on. And if you've spent time, if you care about academia, as I said, I also, I'm an educator by trade. So it's astounding to me that that some folks fight spending money on collecting data, that we're okay with spending millions of dollars funding things that we don't have the research and data points to back up. It's just opposite of the way that I think. But unfortunately, again, citizen legislature, and some people are very happy to make decisions based on gut and personal experience. And I think in some cases that can be good, but in a whole lot of cases, if you're just making decisions based on your own personal experience, I think it's pretty dangerous for a lot of us.
So I want to thank everyone on the panel and all of you. I want to summarize some key points. Get involved, be simple and compelling, do research in Maine, and have good relationships with all your representatives and your community members, and everything will be better.
We will save the world.
Thank you so much, and thank you.
Thank you.